For over 3,000 years, no one knew this place even existed. And then, out of nowhere, archaeologists digging near Alexandria uncovered something absolutely shocking: a forgotten Egyptian city. This place is buried under Greek ruins, hiding secrets that could rewrite the history of pharaohs and their armies. And one of the artifacts, which looks like a simple wine jug, changed everything. We thought that we already placed all the important parts on the map of ancient Egypt: pyramids, Thebes, Luxor, Alexandria. But nope, the map just got an update. The new city was a big deal, and it's about 3,400 years old. It's just been discovered at the site called Kom el Nugus. This place is located west of Alexandria and tucked between the Mediterranean and a saltwater lake called Lake Mariut. This discovery raised a few eyebrows. Scientists thought that this place used to be empty and that it was only settled by the Greeks in about 332 BCE. But it turns out that people lived in Kom el Nugus way before that. When archaeologists were digging through Greek ruins, they started noticing something unexpected: mud brick walls. Yep, you know, the pyramid type. That's the kind Egyptians built during the New Kingdom. These mud bricks were made from mud, clay, sand, and straw. These ingredients were mixed with water and dried in the sun, not baked. Egyptians used them for thousands of years to build houses, temples, palaces, and yes, the pyramids. Of course, other civilizations did use mud brick too, but Egyptian mud brick is kinda quirky. They used straw that grew in their regions, layout styles, and mortar. That's what helped the experts realize that Egyptians used to hang out in Kom el Nugus. That alone raised eyebrows, and then they found more. An entire street layout, buried structures, and even a temple built by Ramses the Great himself. His name speaks for itself. This guy was one of the most famous pharaohs in all of Egyptian history. He ruled ancient Egypt for 60 years, fought huge battles, and just loved building tons of stuff like that temple. People loved him so much that later pharaohs literally pretended to be him or wrote his name on their buildings. That's when archaeologists realized that they weren't looking at some dusty mud bricks of a tiny village. That's an entire buried city. They immediately started digging more. Turns out the whole place wasn't random. It was built with great care. The streets had drains to stop rainwater from damaging the soft mud-brick walls. There were also small tomb chapels with writings about soldiers. This suggests this place might have been the military base, and that changes a lot. In ancient Egypt, when the military showed up, there must have been a reason. So what was it? Protection? Conquest? Control of something important? In the case of this city, it was probably about wine, water, and trade on the edge of the desert. What's even crazier is that we still don't know just how big it was. The team has only uncovered part of it so far. There could be fortifications, warehouses, administrative buildings, or even more religious or royal structures waiting underground. We also don't know what this town was called in ancient times. That name is still buried. But it might be uncovered someday, maybe inside a wall, maybe on a scroll, maybe on another broken jug. One of those already turned out to be a mind-blower. A chunk of a ceramic jar, called an amphora, had a royal seal pressed into it, and that seal bore the name Meredaton. Princess Meredaton wasn't just anyone. She was the eldest daughter of Queen Nefertiti and the older sister of King Tutankhamun. Yes, that's right. Both Nefertiti and King Tut were involved here. All that was about a century before Ramses the Great built one of his temples here. Looks like the city was founded back in the days of another pharaoh, the pharaoh Akhenaten, husband of Queen Nefertiti, father of Princess Meredaton, and future king Tutankhamun. That guy, Akhenaten, was a bit of a wild card. He was the type who really gets weird about one of his interests. He tried to completely change Egypt's religion, forcing everyone to worship the sun disk called Aten instead of the usual deities. He basically told all Egypt that all their mythology was wrong, and from now on, there will be no more Osiris, no more Thoth or Set. Just raw sunlight only, people. That's known in history as the Amarna period. And he went all in, changed his name, built an entirely new capital city called Amarna in the middle of the desert, redesigned temples, rewrote hymns, and even banned traditional religious imagery. Even the art got wild at the time. People started getting elongated heads, belly rolls, and all that humanity and vulnerability carved into stone. It was deliberately weird. He wanted to show the family not as perfect gods, but as human vessels of divine light. Everyone had to awkwardly smile and play along because he was the pharaoh after all. The wackiest part is that after his rule, his son, Tutankhamun, reversed all the sun disk-related stuff. He literally changed his name from Tutankhaten, which means living image of the Aten, the sun disk, to Tutankhamun, which means living image of Amun, one of the great older deities. King Tut brought back the old deities, reopened the temples, and erased as much of Akhenaten's legacy as possible. Looks like his family didn't really like the sun cult after all. Meanwhile, this discovered wine jug shows that the city was probably active, thriving with life during Akhenaten's times. That's huge. Up until now, there was no clear evidence that his radical ideas and projects extended all the way to the north. The jug also shows that vineyards and wine production reached all the way to the north in ancient Egypt. Wine really was a huge deal, worthy of placing a military base here. Princess Meritaten most likely used this jug. Just like with her brother, she was born into the sun and named after it. Her name, also spelled Meritaten, meant beloved of the Aten. As the eldest daughter of Pharaoh and his queen, born right into the middle of radical religious changes, she was raised to perform the future queen's duties. From her earliest years, she walked in temples alongside her mother Nefertiti, shaking the sistrum in solemn rituals. She was there when Akhenaten established his capital city, Amarna. He clearly loved his family. Meritaten's face was etched into its stone walls more than anyone else. In every temple, in every sacred scene, her figure appears, revered. Things get foggy in history after her father passed away. The throne wobbled. King Tut was very young, only 9 years old when he had to take new duties. Meritaten seemed to have been a brief step between her father and her younger brother. She married someone called Smenkhkare. History isn't even sure who that mysterious man was. Could have been a puppet, a phantom king in a crumbling dynasty. May have even been her brother. Whatever the truth was, these two took power and ruled together for a while. Meritaten got the title of the Great Royal Wife, a title of immense power. But Smenkhkare was a very short-lived ruler. He passed away just in about a year. There are some speculations among historians that Meritaten was the actual ruler, the informal female pharaoh, because her brother was too young. Some theories say that she raised Tutankhamun and became a sort of queen regent, mentoring the child who would be used to restore the old order. But all this is unconfirmed. It's very hard for historians to find information about that time because the Amarna period was later condemned. The successors wanted to wipe away Akhenaten's heresy and everything attached to it. This included Meritaten. So even if she ruled, even if she mothered Tut, they tried to bury her in the sands of history. In any case, perhaps this new uncovered city will tell us more about the mysteries of the Amarna period, one of the most chaotic periods of ancient Egypt.
Archaeologists were looking for the long-lost tomb of Cleopatra when they found something that seemed too good to be real. Roughly 43 feet underground beneath a ruined Egyptian temple, there was a perfectly straight tunnel, carved through solid sandstone. The tunnel is over 4,200 feet long, and so precise that experts called it a geometric miracle. The tunnel sits beneath an ancient city west of Alexandria, near Egypt's Mediterranean coast. The team that found it carefully peeled back layers of stone and debris until they hit this passage, about 6.5 feet tall, cut cleanly into bedrock. There were no collapse marks or wandering curves, just precision. If you've ever tried to drill a straight hole into a wall at home and failed within seconds, imagine doing this underground for nearly a mile. Ancient builders had no GPS, no lasers, no modern surveying tools. Yet, this tunnel stays remarkably level over its entire length. That means they understood gradients, angles, and distance in a way that goes far beyond stack stones and hope. Engineers today rely on machines to maintain that kind of accuracy underground. These people relied on knowledge, repetition, and patience. Parts of the tunnel now sit underwater or collapsed, probably after several earthquakes that struck the region centuries ago. Some experts think the tunnel may have once connected the temple to water sources or ritual areas closer to the sea. Archaeologists noticed that the Egyptian tunnel is an exact replica of the Eupalinos tunnel in Greece. It's believed to be one of the most important engineering achievements of antiquity, which only makes the Egyptian tunnel more special. Underground passages in ancient Greece linked temples to sacred springs. Back in ancient times, people moved through space in specific ways, underground and above, to reenact myths and journeys of gods. A tunnel like this could represent a path to the underworld, rebirth, or divine transition. Nobody would invest this much effort in construction just for decoration. Plus, in earlier digs at the site, archaeologists pulled up all kinds of artifacts, including coins with the names and faces of Cleopatra VII and Alexander the Great. They also found figurines, statues of deities, a mummy with a gold tongue, and even an entire cemetery packed with Greco-Roman style mummies. The perfect geometric tunnel isn't an isolated flex. Not far away, underwater archaeologists off the coast of Alexandria uncovered something that sounds like it belongs in a royal travel documentary. A 2,000-year-old pleasure boat that once glided along the Nile. And this wasn't just another fishing vessel or cargo barge. It likely stretched over 115 feet long and 23 feet wide, and had a decorated cabin, plus around 20 rowers, which turned the river into a moving palace. This isn't speculation pulled out of thin air. An ancient Greek geographer named Strabo wrote about these exact boats around the 1st century BCE. He described lavish vessels used by royalty during festivals and ceremonial outings in Alexandria. For years, historians treated that as a poetic exaggeration. Then, this wreck surfaced, and suddenly, Strabo sounded less like a storyteller and more like a witness. Even ancient art backs it up. The Palestrina mosaic from Italy shows richly decorated boats floating down the Nile. They match both the texts and the physical evidence almost perfectly. Inside the wreck, archaeologists found something small but incredibly human. Graffiti scratched into the wood in Greek. Just writing left behind by someone who stood on that deck 2,000 years ago. Researchers haven't fully decoded the text yet, but its existence alone matters. It tells us this wasn't just a floating symbol of power. People lived on it. It was sort of like a modern luxurious yacht, and the Nile was like a highway. All types of vessels with passengers were moving back and forth, visiting friends, carrying their goods for trade, doing business, and, of course, going on pleasure cruises. The location of the pleasure boat makes the story even better. The boat sat near the temple of Isis on Antirodos, an island that once hosted royal and religious buildings before earthquakes and rising seas erased it from the surface. That temple collapsed around 50 CE, and researchers believe the boat may have sunk during the same disaster. Another recent find that has to do with life on the Nile is the lower part of the massive worship complex about 10 miles southwest of Cairo. It connects directly to an upper temple dedicated to Ra, the Egyptian deity of the sun. The newly excavated part is a 4,500-year-old valley temple. The upper temple sits on higher ground, and archaeologists excavated it years ago. The valley temple is closer to the Nile, and it's connected to the upper part by a causeway. A German Egyptologist actually started excavating part of the temple back in 1901, but the groundwater sat much higher then, and he had to stop. Now, the groundwater level is lower, and a modern team has managed to excavate about half of the Valley Temple since 2024. Once they got in, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a columned entrance portico. Then they found blocks carved with a calendar of religious events, almost like an ancient public schedule. The text includes feasts for Sokar, a falcon-headed deity linked to Memphis, which was a major capital during the Old Kingdom, plus the festival of Min, a fertility deity, and even the procession of Ra. The calendar blocks all showed up around the entrance portico area, which most definitely means that the outside facade of the temple displayed this long feast calendar publicly. That's why archaeologists think this might be one of the earliest examples of a true public calendar ever found. A literal event list for an entire community, built into the architecture. On top of that, the team found dozens of decorated blocks covered in inscriptions that named a pharaoh who ruled around 2420 to 2389 BCE and had the temple built. This temple shows how people moved through ancient Egypt. Because the upper temple handled the main worship, but the valley temple made the whole place accessible. It acted like the landing area for boats coming in, either directly from the Nile or more likely from one of its side channels. So instead of hiking across desert terrain, visitors could arrive by water, step onto the temple's landing stage, enter through the valley temple, then head up the causeway ramp toward the upper temple on the hill. After about a century of use, researchers found that the valley temple had been repurposed into a residential area. And the best part is, what they found from that era: 2 wooden pieces used for playing Senet, an ancient board game. Senet shows up at other Egyptian sites too, including King Tutankhamun's tomb, but nobody fully agrees on the rules today. Some discoveries in Egypt create new mysteries instead of solving the old ones. Earlier in 2025, archaeologists announced the discovery of the first pharaoh's burial found in or near the Valley of Kings since King Tut's tomb in 1922. The newly found tomb of Thutmose II flooded almost immediately after burial. Ancient officials rushed in, removed the mummy and most of the grave goods, and hid them somewhere else. The weirdest part is that an alabaster ointment jar inside the tomb links the burial directly to Hatshepsut, Thutmose II's wife and half-sister. The inscription basically says she made this monument for him, which proves she arranged his burial. But it still doesn't explain why she placed him here and later chose the Valley of the Kings for herself. Now, archaeologists are studying a huge mound of rubble near the tomb, about 75 feet tall, and suspect it was built to hide something important. If a second tomb sits underneath, it could be complete and undisturbed. So, the deeper the archaeologists dig, the more ancient Egypt stops feeling like a gone civilization and starts feeling like a paused one. Looks like it didn't just survive time, it outsmarted it, and we're only just beginning to catch up. Warning: if you're a devoted fan of ETs and accept every story about contact with them as fact, you might want to skip this video. What you're about to hear is the hard truth, and yes, it may be disappointing. On the other hand, if the idea of them makes you uneasy, this video might actually put you at ease. And if you don't believe in those little green cuties but constantly find yourself debating people who do, just show them this. First, you need to know that there's no solid evidence that intelligent extraterrestrial life exists. What does exist is strong evidence that all the so-called ET incidents you've heard about during your whole life actually have very reasonable explanations. One of the most famous examples is the Roswell incident. On July 8, 1947, a strange object crashed on a ranch in the state of New Mexico. It was described as a flying disc. First, a local newspaper reported the story. Then, the incident spread across the entire country. People claimed it was the crash of an ET spacecraft. Authorities said the object was a meteorological balloon. People didn't believe them. Rumors exploded. Many theories spread everywhere. Years later, after all the hype slowed down, the truth finally came out. The flying disc was part of a top-secret government project, a high-altitude balloon designed to detect signs of nuclear testing. But even after the truth was revealed, many people refused to accept it. The Roswell incident became a full-blown cultural phenomenon, especially among UFO enthusiasts. Yet, among the thousands of books, articles, and documentaries about Roswell, you won't find a single verified fact proving an ET spacecraft was ever involved there. That same year, another mysterious object was discovered and also caught public attention. No one knows exactly where it landed, but many people connect it to the Roswell incident. At first glance, this metallic fragment seemed extraordinary. Its internal structure looked unlike anything known at the time, which led some to believe it was part of an alien craft. Further analysis showed the object was made from an alloy of magnesium and zinc, with traces of bismuth, lead, and other elements. Of course, the presence of these elements alone doesn't prove the object was made on Earth, since these substances exist throughout the universe. Then, scientists examined the isotopic composition of magnesium and the rest of the materials, and they determined that the alloy was manufactured on Earth. Still, one thing about the sample raised eyebrows: bismuth. Some people speculated that aliens might use bismuth in some kind of propulsion or flight system. However, these ideas were purely speculative. The bismuth found in the samples contained impurities, which clearly showed it was produced using ordinary Earth-based manufacturing methods, not any unknown technology. But that technology would require a pure bismuth alloy. Unfortunately for UFO fans, the analysis showed that the bismuth in the sample contained lead impurities, which is clear evidence that no alien technology was involved. It was created on Earth by people. However, its manufacturing process was unusual because of the specific mix of elements. The object also had damage caused by impact and heat exposure. Most likely, it was a component of another top-secret surveillance balloon. Okay, how about another alien-like incident? This is the famous but though less well-known WOW signal. In 1977, a radio telescope in Ohio detected a strange signal from deep space. It lasted 72 seconds and stood out dramatically from the background cosmic noise. Astronomer Jerry Amon, who discovered it, was so shocked that he wrote "Wow" on the printout. The scientific community briefly suspected that this radio signal might be a message from alien technology, but it was never detected again. Later explanations suggested it may have been radio emissions from a neutron star, amplified by a cold hydrogen cloud. You can also find realistic explanations for other similar cases on the internet. However, Roswell and similar cases happened decades ago. But what about modern stories? You've probably seen videos recorded by pilots showing fast-moving, elusive objects in the sky. Scientists carefully analyzed these videos and found something interesting. The observed behavior contradicted the laws of physics. If an object moved that fast through air or water, friction should produce a visible heat trail or plasma glow. But nothing like that appears in the footage. Does that mean it's alien technology? Probably not. A much simpler explanation is that the cameras used weren't advanced enough to capture what was actually happening. We don't know the distance between the object and the camera. We don't know its real speed. It could be a visual artifact, a sensor glitch, or a lens distortion. If you still believe these recordings show real UFOs, ask yourself this: why, after all these years, do we still have no high-quality footage? Why is it always low resolution, blurry, and often black and white? Millions of unclear images mean nothing compared to a single, clear, high-resolution video, and we don't have one. The probability that UFO sightings are optical illusions or sensor errors is far higher than the probability that they represent alien spacecraft. Many people simply want to believe in ETs, so they amplify hype about any news hinting at extraterrestrial technology. A perfect example is Oumuamua, the first known object to enter our solar system from interstellar space. Some people panicked, claiming it was an alien probe. In reality, it was almost certainly an interstellar asteroid-like object. Remember the more recent panic surrounding 3I Atlas? Online rumors claimed it was an artificial object that would approach Earth in November 2025 and change our lives forever. November has passed, the object is now moving farther away. No alien invasion happened. So does that mean the only way to find extraterrestrial life is to wait for random space rocks to pass by? Or hope someone records a UFO in 4K, or 1080 at least? Can we actually do something ourselves? Yes, we can search for technosignatures. Technosignatures are signs of technological activity that intelligent life could do. These are biosignatures like microbes or molecules that suggest simple life. But searching for biosignatures across space is incredibly difficult. Technosignatures are easier. They include radio signals, laser emissions, or atmospheric pollutants such as carbon dioxide or methane. Earth itself emits technosignatures detectable from afar, so why not look for the same on other planets? Where do we start? There are over 6,000 known exoplanets. Any alien technology would be based on the same physics and chemistry as ours, because the laws of physics are universal. Maybe massive solar panels on a distant planet produce excess heat we can detect. Or perhaps large-scale industry releases chemicals visible through powerful telescopes. There's a checklist of technosignatures scientists look for. When something matches the list, the real work begins. Researchers must confirm that the signal comes from technology, not a natural process in space. A few years ago, astronomers observed a Tabby's star, about 1,280 light-years away. Then, they noticed that it began to darken as some huge object blocked it. Its unusual dimming led to speculation about alien megastructures. They suggested it could be some giant alien ship that parked near the star. In reality, it was just space dust flying around. That's why every technosignature requires careful verification. However, so far, no confirmed technosignatures have been found. Space is vast, the planets are distant. Maybe we simply can't see each other yet. Even if there is intelligent life, our communication might be impossible with current technology for them and for us. One famous Italian-American physicist, Enrico Fermi, once summed this up with a simple question. Where is everybody? No. How is it possible that no one in the whole cosmos has contacted us yet? Perhaps the most uncomfortable answer is the simplest one. Maybe we really are alone. Of course, there's a possibility that the aliens just don't want to get in touch with us, or they're still developing their technologies for interstellar connection. But let's be realistic. Aliens don't exist. Probably.
This coffin seems to defy logic. No visible openings, no way in or out. And yet, inside lies Lady Jeannette Ah, a mysterious woman from ancient Egypt, perfectly preserved even after 3,000 years. How did she get there? It was the third intermediate period in Egypt, a time between great dynasties. Pharaohs wore the blue crowns. Priests in Thebes were almost as powerful as kings. Markets were filled with the cries of merchants selling dates, papyrus, and precious perfumes. Lady Jeannette Ah was in her late 30s or early 40s, old age by Egyptian standards of that time. Like other Egyptians at the time, she ate meals of bread, lentils, and fish. By that age, her teeth were already badly worn down, yellowish with enamel eroded, because food in ancient Egypt often had grains of sand in it. But she wasn't just a regular woman. When she passed away for unknown reasons, her burial was lavish. Locals wrapped her body in expensive linen and adorned with artificial eyes to replace her real ones. That would help her see in the afterlife. And that's exactly how we found her 3,000 years later, in a beautifully decorated sarcophagus. It was made of cartonnage, which is kind of like papier-mâché, made by layering linen and papyrus with adhesive. These coffins were wildly strong, lasting for thousands of years, all thanks to Egypt's super dry climate. But most importantly, Egyptians only used it for the elite. So she was someone very important to the locals, though we might never know why. But there was only one huge problem with her mummy. How did they even put her in the coffin? No matter how much researchers looked, there were simply no entry points. The only visible gap was a tiny slit near her feet. but that's not nearly large enough to place her entire body inside. This mystery puzzled them for decades, until they finally learned the truth only recently. They studied those mummies at the Field Museum in Chicago using new technology, CT scans. It's basically like taking thousands of X-rays and piecing them together to create detailed 3D images. That's how we can learn more about the bodies without disturbing them. And it turns out the ancient Egyptians were unbelievably clever. They didn't construct the cartonnage around Shenat-A's body, which would be a common and easy thing to do. Instead, embalmers created the coffin first. Then, they softened this coffin with moisture to make it flexible. After that, they carefully molded it around her wrapped body. They did cut a slit along the back of the coffin to do that, but then they laced it up like a corset, so it seemed like there were no openings. Finally, they secured a wooden panel at her feet to keep everything in place. That's where the tiny slit came from. Usually, the insides were removed and put in jars, symbolically guarded by the 4 sons of Horus. Egyptians believed that the deceased would need all that stuff once they got into the afterlife. They also thought it would help preserve the body for ages, which, as we can see, worked amazingly well. Thanks to their beliefs, we now have mummies as time capsules. Each son of Horus was supposed to protect each of the specific body parts. The human-headed Imseti for the liver, the baboon-headed Hapi for the lungs, the jackal-headed Dalmatef for the stomach, and the falcon-headed Kebis Senuv for the intestines. It's crazy how much effort the embalmers put into their job, especially in Lady Shenat-A. They wanted to make sure her body remains untouched and the sarcophagus would be perfect for her. You can't help but wonder, who was she if she mattered so much? The ancient Egyptians literally viewed the afterlife as modern retirement planning. You're not just passing away, you gotta prepare yourself for it. Prepare the body, eyes to see, and so on. And the richer or more important you were, the better your afterlife would be. But Shenat-A wasn't the only fascinating mummy they studied. They also decided to scan Harwa, an Egyptian man who lived around the same time. Judging by the mummy, he also had a high social status. His mummy revealed no signs of hard labor, and his teeth were well kept, which means he enjoyed some high-quality food without tons of sand in it. Some fellas got lucky both in life and after it. But there were many mysterious mummies throughout history. One of them is Chin Tzu, also known as Lady Dai. The story of her began in 1968. Some workers near Changsha, China, were digging an air raid shelter for a hospital. But suddenly, they accidentally uncovered an ancient burial site. They came down there and stumbled upon something incredible. 3 tombs belonging to a noblewoman, her husband, and a young man believed to be their son. She was a noblewoman from ancient China, and she had a fascinating backstory. She lived over 2,000 years ago during the Western Han Dynasty. She was married to Li Kang, a guy who served as chancellor to the Changsha Kingdom, a high-ranking official. At first, it looks like Lady Dai lived a life of luxury and privilege. She had private musicians to play at her parties, and for her personal enjoyment. She probably played the guqin, an instrument that back in the day people associated with intellect and elegance. And she certainly ate like an empress. Fine meats, delicacies, and all things like that. Even her wardrobe was full of some exquisite silk, not even mentioning the tons of cosmetics. But all this wealth came at a cost. The more she aged, the worse her health became. She got a full pack: a heart condition, diabetes, high pressure, and liver issues. It also looks like her back was driving her crazy, probably making it hard for her to even move. Finally, as a cherry on top, she developed gallstones. All this packed together eventually led to a heart attack that took her life around the age of 50. There was one haunting detail. Scientists found over 130 melon seeds in her stomach and intestines. Most likely, she ate watermelon just hours before she passed away, which means it was probably during summer when the fruit was ripe. She enjoyed a sweet, simple treat before her life was cut short. The excavation began in 1972, and this wasn't easy at all. Over 1,500 local students had to help. And Lady Di was the most mysterious one. She was buried in 4 rectangular pine boxes, one inside the other like a Matryoshka doll, all wrapped in 20 layers of silk, and all that sealed with lots of charcoal and white clay. The coffins were painted beautifully as well, adorned with protective deities, mythical animals, and clouds which symbolized the heavens. There were drawings of divine creatures and Mount Kunlun. The myth said that on this mountain, people reach eternal happiness. All this told us a lot about the Han Dynasty, their beliefs about afterlife, art, daily lives, and their remarkable craftsmanship. And then researchers finally got to the body. It was astonishing. Soft skin, joints that could still bend, and in general, she was almost intact. She even kept her hair, eyelashes, fingerprints, and even traces of blood. It's like she literally passed away only a few weeks ago. Ancient people used a very clever technique to preserve her. It looks like embalmers put her into some weird, mysterious acidic liquid. This liquid prevented bacteria from growing. Unfortunately, it also gave rashes to all the scientists that touched Lady Di. And this rash lasted for 3 months. And you know what they buried together with her? Over 1,400 artifacts, mostly personal stuff like silk clothes, cosmetics, and musical instruments. Even food, grains, meats, wine, and pastries. There were also 162 carved wooden figurines of various servants and musicians. It's possible that they were either just there to service her even in the afterlife, or maybe based on her actual servants.
Scientists just discovered a lake in Antarctica that flips everything we thought we knew about life on Earth. They drilled through thick ice and found liquid water where everything should be frozen solid. And inside this water, there is life. I mean actual living organisms thriving in the dark, untouched for ages. The story starts with an expedition that added a new, super important spot to the Antarctica map. Between November 2019 and January 2020, researchers trekking across the frozen desolation reached an area called Enigma Lake. They thought they were walking over a huge slab of solid ice, but their gear showed something different. So they used a powerful drill to get through the ice, peered beneath layer after layer, and detected at least 40 feet of liquid water trapped under the surface. They came looking for a rock, but found a hidden world under ice in this Antarctica lake, where they would least expect it. The scientists were shocked and didn't stop at this discovery. They wanted to know where all this water came from, because in this part of Antarctica, the climate is ruthless. Extreme temperature, low precipitation, punishing winds, and solar evaporation aren't exactly perfect conditions for a lake. Any fresh water was supposed to have dried up long ago. So there had to be a source for refills for a subglacial lake in Antarctica like this one. The researchers looked at the chemical composition of the salts and dissolved materials in the water. They noticed some patterns that pointed to a source. It looked like the nearby glacier was feeding the lake via some underground pathway nobody expected to exist. So there it is, an amazing Antarctica discovery hidden beneath ice, fed not from rain or surface melting, but from an underground flow that circles the Earth in silence. And because of that, when the team drilled deeper, they didn't just find water, they found a secret ecosystem. Life, where they thought there couldn't be any. Now by life here, I don't mean the kind that waves at us. I mean tiny creatures, tiny structures, microbial communities that evolved in isolation, shielded by the ice, and pretty restricted to their hidden home. They cover the lake bed in microbial mats, not just blobs of algae, but complex, carpet-like mats of microorganisms. Some mats look like thin, spiky coverings, others like thick, crumpled carpets, or even tree-like structures up to 15 inches tall. And these formations, looking straight out of a sci-fi movie about life on distant planets, aren't random specks of DNA floating in water. They are thriving, building structures, layering, changing over time. So the lake bed is kinda like a forest floor, only it's dark, cold, and covered by ice. If life can flourish under 45 feet of ice in near darkness, maybe our ideas of where it can exist need updating. And we don't know what happens when we disturb this hidden lake ecosystem. What if we inject humans, machinery, or even our breath into the mix? These microbes have lived isolated for who knows how many millennia, maybe even millions of years, without any exposure to the world above. If humans mess with them, these organisms could be at serious risk when they meet microbes they had never met before. The lake could get contaminated, and its ecosystem could change for good. As we step into this new territory, we must be extra cautious. After all, the entire Antarctica is like a book of secrets of evolution, adaptation, and survival that we must read carefully. This continent keeps surprising us. Animals that were never seen before turn up in its remote corners, from bizarre sea creatures to ice-loving insects you didn't know existed. For example, the ice-loving sea anemone scientists spotted hanging upside down from the underside of the Ross ice shelf. It looks like a delicate flower glued to the ceiling, waving its tentacles into water as cold as a bad breakup. Researchers steered a robot under the ice and found a brand new species. Then there's the celebrity newcomer with serious red carpet energy, the Antarctic strawberry feather star. This floating pom-pom can have up to 20 arms. It got its nickname because the body looks, you guessed it, strawberry-ish. And oh, I guess Antarctica is the last place where you'd expect to see a fish nursery, but it has the largest known one in the whole world. Researchers were there towing their cameras along the Weddell Sea seabed to map it when they spotted thousands, then millions of identical bowls in the sediment. The nests covered 93 square miles of seafloor, and there were a total of 60 million of them, one every 10 inches. All the nests belong to icefish. These creatures are white-blooded, meaning they don't have hemoglobin, the stuff that makes blood red, and somehow they still manage to survive in water cold enough to shatter your soul. Every nest had a parent fish sitting guard over about 1,700 eggs. Turns out, Weddell seals feast on icefish, so this massive breeding ground isn't just a nursery, it's also a buffet for the neighborhood predators. And speaking of buffets, the icefish themselves feed from a warm upwelling that pulls up nutrients and microscopic zooplankton. It's all pretty cool that the icefish colony has a hard edge, a literal line in the sand. The edge of that border matches perfectly with the outer rim of the warm upwelling, which looks like a carefully crafted evolutionary trick. Another Antarctica discovery that shocked scientists wasn't a cool-looking fish or a dinosaur bone, but something probably even more important for science: bubbles. Tiny ancient bubbles trapped inside what might be the oldest ice ever brought up to daylight, nearly 1.2 million years old. Before this discovery, researchers had recorded climate history going back 800,000 years, but they wanted more. They spent years searching for the perfect spot where ice could tell the story straight through. Some Antarctic regions hold ice even older, maybe 3 or 4 million years. But it's patchy, and they needed a continuous record. When they finally drilled into the right spot, they found crystal clear ice cores with bubbles that trapped the atmosphere of Earth as it was hundreds of thousands of years ago. When scientists analyze the air inside, they're not just studying gases. They can tell what our distant ancestors inhaled, what the planet exhaled, and how the rhythm of life and climate played out long before us. The period around 900,000 years ago, the same time sealed inside this ice, may have been one of humanity's closest calls. According to genetic studies, the human population shrank to about 1,300 individuals on the entire planet. Nobody knows what exactly led to this, but it could have been the climate. So these ancient bubbles might hold the clues we need to understand how our ancestors survived one of the toughest chapters in Earth's story. And maybe how we can survive the next. Because the planet keeps repeating itself in new and uncomfortable ways, and Antarctica has lessons to teach us. One lesson we might learn the hard way has to do with what's under its ice. Scientists recently found that there's something brewing beneath Antarctica that's anything but chill. There might be volcanoes there, quietly waiting for their moment. Yeah, you heard it correctly. volcanoes, the hot, fiery kind sitting under miles of ice. The team used computer simulations and found that when parts of the ice melt, the pressure holding those volcanoes down eases up. And boom! They could start melting even more ice from below. It's like a self-feeding loop of chaos. The ice melts, volcano wakes up, then more ice melts. Even if humans stopped affecting the climate conditions on the planet tomorrow, that chain reaction could keep going because it's not just about the air. It's about the fire hiding underneath. The scariest part is that this kind of melt could raise sea levels way more than we thought. And since Antarctica has over 70% of all the freshwater reserves on Earth, you can imagine the drama level it could lead to. So you see now that Antarctica map is like a real-life board game for humans, and we must be careful studying and playing it. Off the coast of Croatia, archaeologists have recently uncovered something incredible. A perfectly built stone road, still intact, buried under layers and layers of mud. It's almost 7,000 years old. Who built it? Why? And where does it lead? This road might have been lost forever, if not for sheer luck. Back in 2021, archaeologists were looking at satellite images of the island of Korčula, a little Croatian island in the Adriatic Sea. Suddenly, they noticed some strange shapes, odd patterns, half seen beneath the waters. Curious, they dove into the waters to check it out. That's when they uncovered something incredible, a sunken Neolithic settlement, the village of Solin. But the ancient village was just the beginning. In 2023, while exploring the site further, archaeologists found something even more breathtaking. A perfectly built stone road, still intact, buried under layers of sea mud. It was thousands of years old. The road is only 13 feet wide. It's laid carefully, stone by stone, a ghost of a forgotten world stretching across the seabed. This was no accident of nature. The stones were too precisely shaped, too deliberately placed. And somehow, across 7,000 years of storms and tides, both the village and the road survived. One of the scientists said it's a miracle. The islands around Korčula shielded the coast from massive waves. This spared them both from destruction. They also found something else: ceramic fragments and flint knives, small whispers of the people who lived here in the past. But who were they? The mysterious road goes way back into the Stone Age. An ancient culture called Hvar culture lived on the Hvar Island nearby. But they also spread across the eastern Adriatic coast and built the village of Solin just offshore from the coast of Korčula Island. The road connected the village to the main island. If you set foot on Hvar Island today, you'd see a fascinating island of pine forests, lavender fields, and sunlight that spills across vineyards. But you'd also be stepping into a living mosaic woven from 7,000 years of history. Neolithic people lived there around 4,900 BCE. That was before the rise of cities, before the pyramids of Egypt, before history even had their first kings. These people found shelter in the island's caves. In local places like Grabcheva Cave and Markova Cave, they crafted delicate painted pottery, some of the oldest in Europe. This ancient settlement once bustled with life, perched near beaches where now only waves roll. The people who built it walked barefoot over its stones, carrying baskets of grain, tools, and clay pots filled with water or olive oil. Among those little shards, archaeologists discovered something amazing: the oldest depiction of a boat in all of Europe. Even in 3,500 BCE, the people of Hvar were dreaming of journeys beyond the horizon. And even though the Neolithic farmers of Hvar culture didn't have great technology, they had already learned to tame the earth. They built megalithic stone tombs, raised circles of rock in nearby Gradina Bay, and crafted intricate flint blades and stone axes. Why are Solin village and the road underwater now? We don't know for sure. Perhaps something happened to them in the past that caused this. In any case, the road and Solin are all we have remained from those days. Hvar Island was always a fascinating place to live in. The island's history is rough and beautiful, carved by rebellions, pirates, and foreign kings. Around 385 BCE, the Greeks sailed across the sea and found this beautiful island, a high limestone ridge, hidden freshwater springs, and fertile plains kissed by the sea breeze. No wonder they decided to settle here. These Greeks themselves came from Paros, a sunny island in the Aegean Sea. When they got to Hvar Island, they found a town they called Pharos. They weren't being super original. Now we know this town as Stari Grad, which means Old Town, and it actually is one of the oldest towns in all of Europe. They brought with themselves deep knowledge of farming, sailing, and city building. This helped them to do something extraordinary. They divided the land into perfect geometric squares, neat fields for vineyards, olives, and grains. This perfect patchwork of farms is now called the Stari Grad Plain, and it's still so pure and unchanged after more than 2,000 years that it became a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Later came the Romans. Their villas and roads now also threaded across the hillsides. Then came the Croats. Their traditions, from religious processions to the haunting ancient songs of Holy Week, have survived the passing of centuries. But it was under the Venetians, which was about the 15th century, that Hvar truly blossomed. When the Venetians came there, they chose Hvar town as a major port. They built fortresses and arsenals, cathedrals, theaters, and squares. It was the golden age of Renaissance, and Hvar brought three genius giants of Croatian culture to the world. The first one was Petar Hektorovic. He captured the life of fishermen and the spirit of the sea in his epic Fishing and Fisherman's Talk. In a local castle, the Tvrdalj Castle, his stone villa still guards its secret fish pond. The second one was Hannibal Lukic, who wrote The Slave Girl, the first secular drama in Croatian culture. And finally, Martin Benetovic, a painter, musician, and playwright who left his mark on the island's soul. In the Franciscan monastery by the sea, there's a beautiful painting stretching across an entire wall, The Last Supper. Not the original by Da Vinci. This one is thought to be created by Matteo Ingoli. Same theme, but a different artist, though this work is considered a Renaissance masterpiece. Back then, Hvar Island became a jewel of the Venetian Empire, a naval stronghold, and later, a stage for Renaissance poets. But this place wasn't always peaceful. In the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire came here. Their corsair raiders swept across the sea and wanted to conquer the island. Hvar's people built fortresses that still cling defiantly to the cliffs, even to this day. Napoleon also came here, but even all this couldn't drown Hvar's spirit. Life always returned to the fields. Lavender bloomed purple over the terraces, rosemary and olive trees tangled the hillsides, and wine flowed from vineyards that the Greeks once planted. And still, the culture lived. In the 17th century, the island founded something unheard of: the first ever public theater in Europe. Before, theaters were meant for kings and nobles alone, but this one was a place where commoners and nobles sat together beneath carved stone arches, watching plays lit by candlelight. The locals also founded the first ever professional European Tourist Association. Tourism began early with the formation of the Hygienic Society of Hvar in the 19th century. Today, Hvar is known as the Island of Lavender and is crowned the Queen of the Dalmatian Islands. In the square of St. Stephen, the Cathedral of St. Stephen rises. Its bell tower, also built back in the Renaissance, once warned of Ottoman raiders. In the Benedictine nunnery, unseen by any but a few, the sisters weave agave lace. The threads are pulled from the agave fibers, knotted into impossibly delicate patterns, each one unique, each one a prayer captured in cloth. High above the town, you can still see the ancient cannons aimed out to sea, and below them, the glittering sweep of the Pakleni Islands, looking like little emeralds. There's more sunlight in a year than almost anywhere else in Europe, and the rich history in every festival, in the beauty of the Holy Week processions, and in the old songs that drift on the sea breeze.
Eridu, a megacity older than the first known civilization and older than the pyramids of Giza, was buried in the sands of the Mesopotamian desert for over 2,000 years. Now, scientists have made a discovery that changes what we know about the ancient city. They found over 4,000 canals around Eridu that brought water to more than 700 farms where people worked between the 6th and the early 1st millennium BCE. Now, Eridu was founded around 5400 BCE and was the city of the first kings and history's first city according to the Sumerian king list, an ancient text on a clay tablet. Ancient Sumerians believed that deities created this city when they decided to settle on Earth. Eridu plays such a big role in Sumerian myths and legends that, at some point, people used to think it was just a mythical location. The most famous Eridu myth says that the skies got angry because humans were too noisy, so they decided to send a great flood to wipe them out. A new study showed that the Euphrates River served as the source of water for the entire city. The researchers mapped what remains of the ancient landscape and found a well-developed network of artificial irrigation canals. They discovered 200 large main canals pulling water from the Euphrates, and those canals fed another 4,000 smaller canals. The team used everything from satellite images and drone footage to soil analysis, old records, and remote sizing tech to map out the area. The 700 farms that used the water from the system were different in size, from about 5,000 square feet to over 200,000 square feet. The main canals were a little over a half-mile long, and some stretched more than 5 miles. The smaller canals could be as short as 32 feet. Rivers in Mesopotamia were the main water sources for farming, so ancient farmers had to learn how to guide water from the river to their fields. It all started with simple methods, like digging small canals, but over generations, they learned how to build massive canals up to 62 miles long. The Euphrates itself helped the farmers. Water was moving thanks to gravity down its elevated riverbanks, and natural breaks in the banks let it spill onto the land. Researchers aren't sure when each canal was in use, and it's unlikely that all 4,200 canals were active at the same time during that long period. Now, Eridu used to be an important religious and trade center because of its strategic location on the Persian Gulf. Its economy mostly had to do with fishing, thanks to the Euphrates River. Researchers found fishing nets and weights and whole bales of dried fish at the site. And there were even models of reed boats, the earliest physical evidence we have for constructed boats anywhere. The city was thriving until people abandoned it around the year 600 BCE, and scientists still aren't sure why they did it. The local residents, plus the visiting pilgrims and merchants, had just exhausted all the resources of the land. They had to let it rest several times before abandoning the city for good. It happened when the Euphrates changed its course, and they lost their main source of water. Now, many centuries later, in 1854, a British official was on a mission to this area to check out a remote place that had a bunch of mounds called tells, which are piles of debris left behind by ancient human settlements. At first, Taylor wasn't impressed. He had been hoping to find something big, maybe statues, ancient writing, or ruins of palaces and temples. But with the brief time he had, all he found were things like walls, drains, stone platforms, and pieces of limestone columns decorated with tiny mosaic cones. But he didn't know that these boring mounds were hiding one of the oldest cities on Earth, Eridu. The people at the British Museum got interested in the finding, but the first full-scale excavations took place here only around a century later. The local Iraqi authorities got really interested in the excavations as they were hoping to find more about the earliest days of Mesopotamian history. So they focused on Mound 1, a massive tell as tall as an 8-story building. Soon they uncovered part of an unfinished step pyramid from the end of the 3rd millennium BCE. As they dug deeper, they found layers of human life going back in time. There were levels from the Uruk period, and even remains from a time before the Sumerians called Proto-history. In those lower layers, they discovered multiple rebuilds of the Temple of Enki, the city's main deity. People rebuilt this temple again and again for over 2,000 years. Every time the temple collapsed, they built a new one right on top. Each new version of the temple was bigger and more impressive than the last. From the middle of the 4th millennium BCE, these temple buildings became massive, more advanced than anything else humans had built up to that point. The city in Eridu was also becoming more complex, with clear social classes. Eventually, they stopped rebuilding the temple and put up a step pyramid on top of the ruins. Even though Eridu faded, it likely stayed important as a religious site. Archaeologists found pottery from the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE during excavations, although there were no signs of houses. The Sumerians were an innovative civilization, as you can tell. By 1500 BCE, they invented the cedar plow, a tool that let farmers plow and plant seeds at the same time, using animals like oxen to pull it. This gear even came with instructions. The Sumerian Farmer's Almanac gave farmers advice on how to grow more crops with proper tilling and irrigation. These smart farming tricks helped feed more people, which led to larger cities, an organized ruling system, and more focus on religion. And as their cities expanded, so did their work in writing, math, and spiritual life. 5,000 years ago, the Sumerians had already produced cuneiform, one of the first writing systems in history. So another recent find from the same part of the world proves that bureaucracy existed already 4,000 years ago. Archaeologists found ancient administrative tablets in another ancient Sumerian city. These clay tablets are the oldest solid proof we have of the world's first empire, the Akkadian Empire. The tablets were inside a state archive building made of mud bricks, which had different rooms that acted like offices. Now, before this discovery, archaeologists didn't really understand how the first known empire in the world, the Akkadian Empire, worked behind the scenes. But now, thanks to the recent Gerso excavations, we have the first real and unambiguous evidence of the empire's administrative system. They tracked everything – deliveries, spending, and inventory, from fish to sheep to grains, fabric, and even gems. The tablets also include population records, with names and jobs of men, women, and kids, an ancient version of a census. From these records, scientists found out that women played a key role in Akkadian society. Some women had powerful positions, like high priestesses. The tablets also show a wide range of jobs, from skilled workers like stonecutters to people with simpler roles like temple floor sweepers. Some even included building blueprints, field layouts, and canal maps, proving that the empire had serious organization and planning. Eventually, the city rebelled and gained its independence, and the Akkadian Empire's 150-year rule ended. Now, researchers are carefully cleaning and translating the tablets to fully understand what they say. These new finds will replace older, incomplete ideas about the empire and give us a way more accurate picture of how Akkadian power and the ruling system actually worked.
A vast expanse of white snow, freezing winds, lifeless landscapes, and weird, eerie signals seemingly coming from within Earth. These radio pulses occur in Antarctica, and no one can figure out what they are and where they're coming from. You see, scientists are running an experiment called ANITA, short for Antarctica Impulsive Transient Antenna. Basically, it's a bunch of detectors strapped to giant balloons and floating way up above the South Pole. Their job is to detect extremely high-energy neutrinos. How do they spot them? Right at the moment when neutrinos come into contact with ice and produce an intense, short burst of radio waves. Now, neutrinos are these tiny, almost massless particles that don't have an electric charge. They're everywhere, and billions of them are flying through you every second, even while you're watching this video. Neutrinos come from all over the place, from the sun, exploding stars, deep space, even from under your feet. The sun pumps them out non-stop as it fuses hydrogen into helium. Stars that are going off blast out huge bursts of neutrinos during supernova explosions. When high-energy cosmic rays hit our atmosphere, they make new neutrinos that rain down on us too. And some even come from radioactive stuff decaying inside Earth. The oldest neutrinos have been flying through the universe since the Big Bang, but they're practically invisible because they almost never react with anything. That's why scientists use unbelievable experiments like ANITA to try and catch even a few of them. But let's get back to that fateful day when everything changed. Normally, the radio signals produced by neutrinos bounce off the ice and fly upward. That's where ANITA can catch them. This is the whole point of the experiment, to study neutrinos and learn more about distant cosmic events like supernovas or whatever's happening light years away. But then something really weird happened. The detectors picked up radio waves that weren't bouncing off the ice at all. They looked like they were coming from below the horizon, from under the ice. Now, this shouldn't even be possible. According to everything we know about physics, signals can't just travel upward through solid rock and ice. One of the researchers, Stephanie Wiesel from Penn State, also said that those radio waves were coming in at super steep angles, like 30 degrees below the surface. The only way that could happen is if the signal had passed through thousands of miles of solid rock before hitting the detector. But if that were true, the rock would have completely absorbed it. So something just didn't add up. The team ran all the numbers and still got no clear answer. But for them, it was an interesting problem, since they didn't actually know what those anomalies were. What they did know was that they were probably not neutrinos.
That's because if the team does detect a neutrino, that means it's traveled an insane distance without bumping into anything, possibly all the way from the edge of the observable universe. So, whatever ANITA has picked up, it's not behaving like anything scientists have seen before. It might mean there's some totally new type of particle out there, or maybe something else is going on that we just don't understand yet. They published the findings in physical review letters, but the mystery remains unsolved. No one really knows what's going on under that Antarctic ice, just that something out there isn't playing by the rules. Now, if scientists actually manage to detect and trace where those crazy fast particles come from, they can learn tons of stuff about the universe. Way more than even the biggest, most expensive telescopes allow us to see. You see, neutrinos basically zip through space almost at the speed of light, barely bumping into anything. It means they can carry untouched data about events that happened millions or even billions of light years away. That's why Wiesel and a bunch of other researchers around the world have been building these insanely sensitive detectors to catch neutrino signals. Even the tiniest ones are super important, because in this field, one tiny blip of data can hold a treasure chest of information. So, researchers have been designing setups in both Antarctica and South America to catch these rare particles. ANITA is one of those detectors, and Antarctica's the perfect spot for it. There's hardly any radio noise, there are no cities, no traffic, and no random interference. The setup is actually pretty cool. They attach a cluster of radio antennas to a giant balloon, send it a few dozen miles up into the sky, and make it float over the endless stretches of white ice. From up there, it points downward, listening for faint radio signals coming from deep inside the ice. When one of those super rare neutrinos, specifically a tau neutrino, hits the ice, it creates another particle called a tau lepton. That lepton then shoots out of the ice and starts breaking down, losing energy and turning into smaller bits. That decay process gives off what's called an air shower, kind of like a spray of invisible sparks flying through the air. If we could actually see those air showers with our eyes, they'd look like someone waving a sparkler through the dark, bright streaks trailing behind as it moves. Studying the direction and pattern of these signals, the ones from the ice showers, and the ones in the air showers, scientists can figure out where the original particle came from. Usually it's super precise, kind of like bouncing a ball off the ground. You can predict where it'll go, But these weird new signals don't bounce the way they're supposed to. The angles are all wrong way steeper than anything the models can explain. So the team dug deeper. First, they looked at all the data from Anita's multiple balloon flights. Then they compared it against tons of computer simulations of cosmic rays and neutrinos and filtered out all the usual background noise. They even cross-checked their results with other experiments like the ice cube detector, which is also located in Antarctica, and the Pierre Auger Observatory in Argentina. They wanted to see if anyone else had picked up similar upward-going air showers. And guess what? Things got even weirder. They found nothing. No other detectors had picked up anything that could explain what Anita had seen. That's why the researchers ended up calling the whole situation anomalous. It basically means, yeah, we have no idea what this is, but it sure isn't behaving like a neutrino. Whistle explained that the signals just didn't fit into the usual picture of how particles were supposed to act. Some people have floated ideas, like maybe it's some new kind of physics, or a hint of dark matter. Dark matter is basically that invisible stuff that keeps the universe from falling apart. It's everywhere. We just can't see it. Scientists have been trying to figure out what it actually is for almost a century, and it's still one of the biggest mysteries out there. Everything we can see, like stars, planets, people, dogs, makes up only about 5% of the universe, and dark matter makes up around 27%. The rest is something even stranger called dark energy. Scientists think dark matter is what gives galaxies their shape and holds everything together like cosmic glue. Without it, the universe would look totally different. It would be totally amazing to find out that this theory is true. But since Ice Cube and Auger haven't caught the same thing, that really limits the possibilities. Penn State has been in the neutrino detecting game for almost a decade now, building detectors and analyzing all kinds of cosmic signals. And the team is already working on their next big project, a brand new detector called Puel. It's going to be bigger, more sensitive, and way better at spotting those elusive neutrino signals. For now, this remains just one of those long-running cosmic mysteries that keep scientists awake at night. But the team is optimistic. When Pueo goes up, it'll have better sensors, which means if there really are more of these anomalies out there, this time they'll catch them. And maybe then we'll finally figure out what's behind them.
One more step in the wrong direction, and the crossbows will release their arrows. If you open the wrong door, you'll end up in a river of mercury. It's almost impossible to get out of this place, but it is even more difficult to get here. No, this is not a location from an adventure movie, but a treasure hunter. This is a real giant tomb filled with traps and streams of toxic mercury. And it's not somewhere deep in the Amazon jungle or an unknown island. This tomb is located in central China, near the city of Xi'an. And you know what the coolest thing is? This tomb was built more than 2,000 years ago. And even now, in the 21st century, we still don't know how to get there. But let's start from the beginning. Many of you have probably heard of terracotta statues. Thousands of clay sculptures of people. Those statues were first found in 1974, when a group of peasants were digging decks near Xi'an. They found a detailed human-sized figure, and that was 1 out of 1,000. Each figure was made as realistic as possible. Each of them was unique and had its distinctive details. More than 50 years have passed, and scientists are still digging up these sculptures. The number has already exceeded 8,000. But what are they doing there? What is their purpose? Terracotta sculptures are kinda guarding the tomb of Emperor Qin Shi Huang. He was such an influential man in China that he wasn't just buried in a tomb. His servants created a giant coffin complex the size of a small town. So, if thousands of clay guards symbolically protect this place, it's difficult to imagine what's in the center of this ancient, gigantic tomb. But first, let's find out who Qin Shi Huang was, and then move on to the dangerous traps. He was the first son of the ruler of the Kingdom of Qin. It was one of the 6 kingdoms that existed on the territory of modern China. In 2059 BCE, when Qin Shi Huang was born, those 6 kingdoms were independent and separated from one another. Moreover, there was a strong conflict between them that lasted for more than 200 years. But Qin Shi Huang turned out to be the man who managed to conquer and unite all these kingdoms. He became more than just a king. He became the first emperor of China. But how did he complete a seemingly impossible task? Natural disasters, clever strategy, tactics, and skills helped him to conquer the 6 kingdoms. Scientists are still arguing about some of the details of how this happened. All that can be said is that Qin Shi Huang was a very wise and intelligent emperor. So it's not surprising that his burial turned out to be so huge. He was buried in the largest and most luxurious funeral complex in the history of China. The area the size of a small city contains many underground caves filled with things an emperor could need in the afterlife. In ancient China, as well as in ancient Egypt, people believed that when an emperor went to the other world, he could take with him those things that were buried with him. Unfortunately, sometimes it could be people, but Qin Shi Huang acted wisely and correctly. He decided to bury clay statues. But the coolest thing is that the architects and builders of this complex made it impregnable. The whole area holds many secrets, historical artifacts, and priceless objects. There's a beautiful place with the emperor's body in the center of this tomb. Imagine how many treasures you can find there, and all of them were meant to remain untouched and unseen by other people. And we probably won't be able to get to them, at least in the near future. Ancient Chinese historian Sima Qian wrote something about the tomb about 100 years after the emperor's burial. He said that this place had dangerous traps inside the tomb that would destroy anyone who dared to enter the tomb. The engineers installed crossbows with loaded arrows and also poured a huge amount of mercury, simulating the movement of rivers. Of course, that was 2,000 years ago, and crossbows probably don't work anymore. But what about mercury? This toxic metal has no expiration date. It's shiny and moves quickly in liquid form. It looks beautiful, but don't touch it. Even a small drop of mercury can cause damage to your body. Inhalation of its vapors or ingestion causes damage to nerves, the liver, kidneys, and many other symptoms. And that's just one drop. Imagine how dangerous rivers of this substance can be. Who knows how much mercury was loaded there by the tomb builders? But even if you dodge all the traps and don't end up in the poisonous river, mercury would still be able to harm you. Its vapors can pass through the cracks in the walls. This means that the entire tomb is probably soaked in this substance. And by the way, this is not just a guess. Scientists have measured the mercury level at the excavation site and found that it's much higher than normal. But why mercury? In ancient China, mercury was considered the elixir of youth, the source of immortality. According to the records, Qin Shi Huang often took pills with this element. Perhaps this was the reason that his life ended at the age of 49. In any case, people can damage ancient structures and artifacts during excavations. For example, archaeologists caused great damage to Tutankhamun's tomb during its exploration. You dig around, but then suddenly the entrance collapses and you destroy vases, scrolls, interior decorations, and other stuff. But even if you do everything carefully, the writing and drawings on the walls can be destroyed by sunlight or oxygen. Places where there has been no fresh air and ultraviolet radiation for thousands of years have their own chemical composition that can be damaged by contact with the outside world. In the 1970s, when archaeologists were excavating terracotta sculptures, the paint pigment fell off the statues because of contact with the sun and air. Fortunately, the archaeologists quickly adapted and created a technology that allowed them to get the statues out without damaging the paint. It was a long and careful process, but it was worth it, and here's why. According to ancient writings, the emperor created an underground kingdom with a beautiful palace in the center. He decorated the ceiling of this palace with expensive pearls. You know why? To simulate the stars in the night sky. And that's just the ceiling. It's difficult to imagine how the walls, floor, and tomb of the emperor are decorated. Besides, scientists expect to find many other statues that copy the emperor's servants. So, in simple terms, the tomb of Qin Shi Huang is a paradise for archaeologists and historians. But of course, it will take more than one generation before they extract all the treasures. Some experts predict that the excavation of the entire tomb could take centuries. But of course, new archaeological technologies can change everything. For example, non-invasive research methods mean you don't have to enter the tomb. You can see it through a special device. Another idea is the use of muons. Those are subatomic products that appear as a result of the collision of cosmic rays and atoms in the Earth's atmosphere. The point is that these muons can penetrate through solid objects, just like X-rays. Or how about nanotechnologies? Imagine millions of tiny digger robots climbing into a tomb and starting to scan the area. They transmit the data to a computer, and then scientists create a holographic model. It all sounds cool, but to be honest, the charm of archaeology is lost here. It's one thing when you carefully dig up some ancient artifact with your hands, see it with your own eyes, and scrupulously clean it from the ground. And it's completely different when you watch it on a computer screen. But in any case, technologies using muons or some kind of robots ensure people's safety. It's better if a computer falls into a trap than if it happens to an archaeologist.
Back in 1912, British newspapers were buzzing with one bold claim: the first humans appeared in Britain, not Africa. It felt like history itself had been rewritten, and everyone bought into it. Crowds cheered, scientists raised their glasses, and the tiny village of Piltdown in Sussex suddenly became the spotlight for what was hailed as the greatest evolutionary discovery ever. It all happened thanks to this guy, Charles Dawson, a curious amateur archaeologist who was dreaming of making a name in science. He claimed he had found bone fragments of a transitional creature between apes and humans. Dawson teamed up with Arthur Smith Woodward, a respected geologist from the Natural History Museum, and together they assembled fragments of skulls, teeth, and even primitive tools. They unveiled their find, the Piltdown Man, to the Geological Society, and for decades everyone believed it. Textbooks even rewrote human evolution around it, and entire generations memorized it as pure truth. But here's the twist. In 1949, new technology to determine the precise age of objects came along, and things just didn't add up. Tests showed that the skull was only about 50,000 years old, not hundreds of thousands. Then came an even bigger shock. The skull and jaw didn't even belong to the same species. Someone had combined a human skull with the jaw of an ape, probably an orangutan. And even worse, they filed down the teeth to make them look more human and stained the bones to match the surrounding gravel. A Frankenstein fossil and its creator managed to trick the entire world into believing they'd found a missing piece of humanity's puzzle. So Dawson went down in scientific history, but probably not the way he was hoping to. And he wasn't the only one. Some did it for money, others for fame. In the late 19th century Paris, museums were collecting ancient treasures like they were trading cards. When a stunning gold tiara, supposedly belonging to an ancient Scythian king, Ctesiphon, appeared on the market, the Louvre had to have it. It was breathtaking, detailed, majestic, fit for a ruler. The museum proudly paid a fortune and displayed it as a masterpiece of ancient craftsmanship. Then came the heartbreak. A few years later, an entrepreneurial goldsmith from Odessa read about the Louvre's glorious find and burst out laughing. He recognized the tiara because he made it with his own hands. It was a modern piece, a commission he created for local dealers, except they never told him they planned to pass it off as an ancient treasure. The Louvre was humiliated. Once again, the whole world believed in a beautiful lie, and the goldsmith who had just made the museum look ridiculous ended up famous in the world of art. The tiara still holds the Guinness World Record for the greatest goldsmith fraud of all time. Another story of a well-planned scientific hoax takes us to a quiet town of Cardiff, New York, a couple of decades before the Louvre incident. In 1869, workers digging a well struck something hard and enormous. They uncovered what looked like a petrified 10-foot-tall man lying in the earth. Crowds poured in from miles around to see it. Preachers called it proof of the biblical giants mentioned in Genesis. Scientists debated whether it was fossilized or divine. Within days, the Cardiff giant became a sensation. People paid good money to see it, 50 cents a ticket, which was a lot back then. Later, it turned out that a man named George Hull carved the mysterious giant from gypsum after an argument with a Methodist reverend. Hull just wanted to prove how easily you can fool people, especially religious believers, unlike himself. So he buried the fake giant, and it worked too well. Even after experts exposed the hoax, visitors didn't care. They kept coming because they wanted to believe. Over time, the giant changed ownership several times. You can now see it at the Fenimore Farm and Country Village Museum in Cooperstown, New York. Well, speaking of museums, you might have seen crystal skulls that glow under light, presented as sacred artifacts from Mesoamerican temples. Yes, that skull from an Indiana Jones movie with ancient Aztec powers or even extraterrestrial energy. So, museums displayed such skulls proudly until scientists at the British Museum and the Smithsonian decided to give them a closer look. And what they found shattered the myth. They found that the skulls were made with modern rotary tools and abrasives that ancient carvers didn't have. In other words, someone in the 1800s or 1900s made them using modern machinery and fooled the world. They weren't messages from deities or some advanced creatures from space, just very fancy paperweights that tricked so many people into believing in some ancient superpowers. Well, let's jump several decades closer to the present day, shall we? In the 1960s, Yale University revealed what looked like a discovery that could rewrite world history: a 15th century map showing North America labeled Vinland. It meant Vikings had mapped America long before Columbus. The headlines were sensational. The idea was romantic. Explorers crossing icy seas century before Europe even knew America existed. But something just didn't add up. The parchment was generally medieval, but the ink wasn't. Decades of testing revealed it contained titanium dioxide, a pigment invented in the 20th century. In 2021, Yale confirmed it. The Vinland map was a modern forgery, drawn over old parchment to make it look ancient. It wasn't proof of Viking genius, but rather of human cleverness on one side and the tendency to be easily persuaded on the other. And when we speak of persuasion, you don't have to try too hard when a really trustworthy source like National Geographic shares something, right? Well, in 1999, it presented what it thought was the ultimate discovery: a fossil that bridged the gap between dinosaurs and birds. It was called Archaeoraptor, and it was going to change everything we knew about evolution. The fossil came from China, and on first glance, it was perfect. A dinosaur tail, bird-like wings, and bones that seemed to tell the story of flight's evolution. But soon, paleontologists started whispering. The bones didn't quite line up. CT scans revealed the ugly truth. It was literally glued together from parts of different species. A dinosaur tail from one fossil, a bird body from another. Someone had Frankensteined the fossils to make a more valuable specimen. The embarrassment hit hard, especially for National Geographic, which had built an entire story around a fake the world liked to believe. Now, if you think scientific hoaxes are all in the past because of all the 20th century high-tech, here's a surprise for you. In 2020, the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. made a stunning confession. All 16 fragments of its prized Dead Sea Scroll collection were modern forgeries. They'd spent millions acquiring what they thought were sacred 2,000-year-old texts, only to learn they were made of ancient leather painted with modern ink. The forgery was so advanced that even experts were fooled at first. But after detailed forensic tests, it became clear the holy relics were anything but holy. It wasn't just about money, it was about faith. Thousands of visitors had stood in front of those glass cases, feeling awe, reverence, and connection. only to learn it was a show built on lies. And finally, it's time for one of the eeriest hoaxes of all. In 2000, a mummy surfaced in Pakistan, claiming to be a 26-year-old Persian princess, the daughter of Xerxes. They found her in a gilded sarcophagus, wrapped in golden robes. Her face was eerily well preserved. Archaeologists were stunned, but something about her looked wrong. CT scans, linguistic analysis, and radiocarbon dating revealed the horrifying truth. The mummy wasn't ancient at all. She was a modern woman, and someone likely took her life and then mummified her to sell as a fake relic. Well, yikes. The story went from exciting to tragic overnight and broke many hearts. What was supposed to be a royal miracle turned out to be a human crime and yet another lie. All these stories have one thing in common: hope. People want to believe. They want to touch the past, to find proof that connects them to something bigger. Whether it's scientists looking for the missing link, museums wanting fame, or believers searching for signs of faith, we all crave wonder. History is full of tricksters, and sometimes the best stories come from the fakes that fooled us all.
75 million years ago, North America was full of scary dinos, both walking and flying, and insects the size of birds. But the biggest predator there was something way scarier, a crocodile so massive it could swallow dinosaurs whole. This beast was roughly the length of a school bus, weighed more than 5 tons, and had teeth the size of bananas. Its name was Deinosuchus, which literally means terrible crocodile. And trust me, it lived up to that name. Scientists have found its fossils all across North America, from Mexico to Texas to New Jersey and Montana. It means this monster could live pretty much anywhere it wanted. It wasn't picky. It roamed rivers, swamps, and even coastlines. And when it was hungry, anything that moved was fair game. Fossilized dinosaur bones show massive bite marks matching its jaw pattern. So yes, it actually took down dinosaurs. What's even crazier is its bite force. Based on skull reconstructions, scientists estimate it could crush bones with more power than T-Rex. So if a T-Rex ever got close to the water, it might have ended up as lunch. But Deinosuchus wasn't just a bigger and meaner version of today's crocodiles. It was more closely related to alligators. Recent studies show that it actually belonged to an ancient branch of crocodilians that split off before the ancestors of modern alligators and crocodiles.
It was like that weird cousin in your family tree who doesn't quite fit in, but somehow looks like everyone. It had traits from both groups, like salt glands that helped it survive in both freshwater and saltwater. That's rare because most crocs today can't handle salty environments for long. This feature might have been its secret superpower. Around that time, North America was divided by a massive inland sea called the Western Interior Seaway. It stretched from the Arctic Ocean down to the Gulf of Mexico. Deinosuchus could travel across it, sneaking along the coasts and striking anywhere there was food. Still, scientists argue about its favorite hangout spot. Some say it mostly lived in rivers and swamps, and the fossils found near the coast just happened to be preserved better there. Others think it really did patrol the ancient shoreline, waiting for dinosaurs that wandered too close. Either way, this reptile ruled its world, and the climate of its time helped it thrive. The late Cretaceous was a warm, humid idyll filled with wetlands, forests, and endless food sources. Giant turtles, fish the size of cars, and whole herds of herbivorous dinosaurs gave Deinosuchus an all-you-can-eat buffet. As long as the ecosystem stayed stable, it could keep getting bigger and bigger, and it did. Throughout Earth's history, huge crocodiles have evolved again and again. It's like nature's favorite blueprint for apex predator. Even today, Nile crocs and saltwater crocs are living proof that this ancient design still works perfectly. Some scientists even joke that crocodiles are basically dinosaurs that decided to chill and wait it out. They survived mass extinctions while most other big reptiles vanished. Deinosuchus wasn't so lucky and went extinct around 73 million years ago, most likely because the environment changed and its food sources dwindled. But the ocean is still full of mysteries. Maybe some gigantic croc-like beasts are still lurking out there. And while we're guessing, let's look at some other prehistoric creatures that make scientists rewrite what they thought we knew about life on Earth. First up, we have the Dragon of Death. Don't even make me pronounce its full name, Thanatosdracon amaru. Scientists found its bones in western Argentina, in formation layers called the Plautier Formation, from about 86 million years ago, the late Cretaceous. This creature wasn't just big, it was gigantic for a flying reptile. Judging by some of its bones, it has a wingspan somewhere between 23 and 30 feet. That's like a small plane wing outstretched. It's officially one of the largest pterosaurs ever discovered in South America. Its fossils are pretty well preserved, including parts that are usually squishy and fragile in flying reptiles like vertebrae and limb bones. This gives scientists clues not just about how it moved, but about what ecosystems were like back then. Looks like it enjoyed marshy floodplains, big open skies, and plenty of prey below. Our dragon likely used its size to its advantage, either going after small dinosaurs or scavenging. The fact that this massive creature managed to evolve wings capable of flight is just crazy. Next, we've got a creature that looks like a mix of a dino and a skunk to me, Stegosaurus elengasin. Scientists found fossils of this cool guy in southern Chile, among rocks deposited about 75 million years ago. The thing that hits you first, let's hope, not literally, is its tail. Instead of the usual spikes or clubs you get in other armored dinos like ankylosaurs, Stegosaurus had a flat blade-like tail made from fused bones. It looked almost like a weird paddle or frond. Scientists compare it to Aztec ammunition because of that blade structure across the tail's rear half. It wasn't huge, only about 6.5 feet long, but what it lacked in size it made up for in weirdness and cleverness. Its body had armor plates, protective skin scutes, and a skull structure showing features of different dinos. So it was kind of a hybrid in style, which got paleontologists rewriting some of the family trees of armored dinosaurs. Also, the fossil is unusually complete, about 80%, which is rare because armor bones are often damaged or missing. This is super useful for science because it shows us how armor evolved, especially in southern continents. And you definitely need to meet our next hero, a truly bizarre marine reptile that once patrolled the waters of what's now Wyoming, Serpentisuchops fisteri. This creature was part crocodile, part sea monster, and 100% nightmare fuel. Scientists first found its fossils over 25 years ago, but they only recently managed to piece together enough of its remains to truly understand it. It had a super long neck, which was normal for plesiosaurs, and a croc-like skull and body. Most fossil books would tell you these traits shouldn't exist in the same animal. So this guy was a stunning exception. Paleontologists have found its lower jaw, a large portion of its skull, neck vertebrae, tail, and ribs. So they were able to reconstruct not just what it looked like, but how it likely moved, swam, and hunted. About 35% of its body is preserved, which is not so often for marine reptiles, and it lets scientists learn a lot about its lifestyle. With its long neck and the power of a crocodile, plus a super combo of speed, reach, and bite, this guy was most likely a top predator of its time. Last but not least, we have this cool dino, Duonicus tsokhtbatari, that lived in Mongolia's Gobi Desert around 90 to 95 million years ago during the Cretaceous period. It wasn't a meat-eater like T-Rex, but more of a plant muncher. It grew to about 10 feet long, roughly the size of a tall adult human lying down, and weighed around 575 pounds. Pretty hefty for a leaf-eater. The craziest thing about this heavy guy was its hands. It only had 2 fingers on each hand, and each finger carried a giant curved claw about a foot long, covered in keratin, the same stuff your nails are made of. That keratin actually added over 40% to the claw's length, which is super rare to see preserved in fossils. Because of that, scientists can actually study the full shape and structure of the claw, not just the bone. Its hands weren't just for show, though. We can see fused wrist bones and stiff joints in the fossil, which means it could grab and pull down branches to eat leaves. So, having fewer fingers could actually be a bonus if your goal is to reach and rip down vegetation. It's a really cool example of how dinosaurs adapted in weird and specific ways to survive.
The first computer that resembles the machines we use today was invented back in the 19th century. It already seems much earlier than you probably thought, but there was an even older prototype. The Antikythera mechanism was invented by the Greeks over 2,000 years ago. Over a century after its discovery, scientists might have finally solved its mystery. Sponge divers accidentally found the Antikythera mechanism on the bottom of the sea of the Greek island of Antikythera at the very beginning of the 20th century. It was one of the many ancient treasures from the shipwreck of a Greek trading ship that probably set sail around the year 60 before the Common Era. There were marble statues and jewelry, beautiful glass bowls, rich furniture, and one mysterious device. It had a case made of a corroded clump of metal and was the size of a large dictionary. The sponge divers didn't know what to do with it and took this strange item to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. Months later, the lump broke apart and it turned out that a real architectural gem was hiding inside. It had at least 30 gears, and there were traces of many more that hadn't survived. The mechanism was just sitting there for 50 years before historians finally decided it was worth their attention. The big brains who worked with it thought it was a super complex astronomical calculation machine from over 2,000 years ago. They couldn't believe it could have been made in ancient Greece or anywhere else in the ancient world. The tech behind the gadget was centuries ahead of its time. Over the decades, different scientists have been trying to solve the mysteries of this super advanced device. They've used X-rays, CT scans, and all sorts of fancy tools. They thought it could have been a navigation device, or even some kind of time travel contraption. Some of them even believed it wasn't from our planet. In 2021, a team of scientists presented a computational model that showed how this unique contraption might have worked. According to them, it was like a tiny ancient supercomputer, covered in Greek inscriptions with some astronomical secrets hiding in them. The Greeks probably used it for tracking the positions of the sun, the moon, and lunar phases with a half-silvered ball. The way the moon moves in the sky is really tricky to copy. To do it, whoever created the mechanism used a very clever system with special gears and a slot and pin mechanism. These gears, called epicyclic gears, work together in a complex way. The slot and pin help to make tiny changes in the moon's movement. If you flipped over the mechanism, you'd see some groovy dials, including one with a spiral slot that tracked lunar months. They were used to keep those calendars in check. There was also another dial that predicted solar and lunar eclipses, like some cosmic fortune teller. Depending on which display you were looking at, you could see all of these different functions, so it was pretty much like an ancient tablet. The main theory is that the mechanism was made in a workshop on the island of Rhodes. It could have been a fancy order for a rich customer from northern Greece, and that's how it could have ended on the trading ship. Some people think that the device was the creation of the legendary mathematician and inventor Archimedes himself. But he had lived a couple of centuries before this particular Antikythera mechanism was created. So he could have invented the concept, but couldn't have created this very device. He might have started with a simpler version and then refined it over time, using the latest knowledge of astronomy. Because the Antikythera mechanism is the only physical remnant of many mechanical astronomical displays from the past, we have nothing to compare it with. It might not let its users travel back and forth in time, but it sure could predict astronomical events in the future.
The ancient Greeks didn't create it to do work. They were trying to model the skies. It doesn't look like they needed it for navigation, so another theory is that they could use it to create horoscopes. But then again, it was way too complicated for such an entertaining purpose. It sounds more like it was some kind of a philosophical and educational tool. It had in one place all of their knowledge of the universe and how it works that was available at its time. The inscriptions on the mechanism weren't some instructions for experts. They were made for everyone to easily understand them. The latest news about the Antikythera mechanism is that scientists from the University of Glasgow used some special math methods on it. They wanted it to figure out how many holes were in one of its broken rings. They found new proof that one part of the Antikythera mechanism was probably used to keep track of the Greek lunar year. In a new paper they published, the scientists shared that they found that the ring probably had 354 holes. This new research was sort of inspired by a YouTuber who collected data on the mechanism. He was trying to make a copy of the calendar ring and was looking for ways to figure out how many holes it had. To solve this mystery, co-authors of the new study used a special math method called Bayesian analysis. This method uses probability to figure out uncertain things based on incomplete information. They looked at the positions of the holes that were still there and the placement of the 6 surviving pieces of the ring to calculate the likely number of missing holes. Now, they're more sure than ever that the ring had either 354 or 355 holes, not 360 holes, which some earlier studies had suggested. The second co-author of the study used the same techniques that normally analyze the signals from the gravitational wave detectors. These detectors measure tiny ripples in space-time caused by massive events like black holes colliding. The results were really detailed and showed the same number of holes as the mathematical method. The holes were placed with amazing accuracy, with only a tiny average difference of 28 thousandths of a millimeter between each hole. Professors behind the study were really impressed with this, as the ancient Greeks had to measure very accurately and have a very steady hand to punch the holes so precisely. So, it looks like the previous studies that had suggested the gadget used to track the lunar calendar must have been correct. No matter what it really was, the mechanism changed our understanding of how advanced the ancient Greeks were. We knew they had built the Parthenon and the Lighthouse of Alexandria even earlier than they created the device, but this one takes them to a whole new progress level. Some things are still not clear about it, like why it took so long for scientists to catch up and invent something as sophisticated as this ancient marvel. Perhaps there's still some gaps in the historical record. Another question is why we haven't found more of the same unique advanced mechanisms. This could have a practical explanation, as bronze was a precious material back in the day of the mechanism. So, when one contraption stopped working, people probably melted it down for its valuable materials to reuse them. Or maybe there are more ancient computers hiding at the bottom of the ocean and we have yet to discover them. Most researchers have agreed with the results of the new study, but there is one who doesn't. Mechanical engineer Tony Freeth, who is an expert on the ancient computer, believes the conclusion of the study is just wrong. He claims the gadget already has one lunar calendar that is more precise than this one. Looks like, although we are one step closer to solving the Antikythera mechanism mystery, the hunt for the truth is still far from being over. Deep beneath the soil in Scotland lies one of the largest Neolithic stones ever discovered. If it had been left above ground, it might have drawn more visitors than Stonehenge. But something strange happened. After excavating it, the archaeologists chose not to display it. Instead, they reburied it for good. Whatever they felt, whatever they saw, it was enough to seal the stone back into the earth. Why though? I mean, we know Neolithic people drew and carved warnings and important pieces of information on stone. That's why the Cocknose stone was so intriguing when it was first discovered. It all began with Reverend James Harvey, a local minister who stumbled upon this enormous slab back in the 1880s near Clydebank, just outside Glasgow, Scotland. The stone was a typical sandstone, like the ones you'll find in Stonehenge, but it was a smooth type of sandstone that worked as a canvas. When Harvey found the rock, it was covered in swirling rings, deep grooves, and strange cup-like markings. Harvey must have recognized right away that this was no ordinary rock. It was a message from thousands of years ago. As a matter of fact, it was a message straight from 3000 BCE. Cochno means little cups in Gaelic. The ones who named it were literally describing what they were seeing, rings upon connecting rings. These drawings have sparked so many theories. Some experts see them as the earliest forms of written language, like abstract codes that predate words. And then there are those who think the stone holds a map of the sky, a way for Neolithic people to track the sun, moon, and stars. Like the pyramids of Giza, which some people believe are hauntingly aligned with the constellation of Orion. The cups and markings on the Cochno stone could be aligned with some special constellation. The most bizarre theory is the one that says the stone was used as a portal. One of the scientists says that locals believed that the drawings could indicate this was a place to be reborn, a place where people could sink into the earth, only to be born again. In this life or in the afterlife. If that were true, maybe that's why they hid it, right? Not quite. In the 1930s, an archaeologist named Ludovic Mann heard about the rock and decided to visit it. This guy had an unusual idea and decided to take paint to the site and paint over the markings on the stone's surface. His weird idea had a deeper meaning though. He was trying to connect the dots, literally, and see if the stone worked as an ancient astronomical chart. He thought the carvings might predict solar and lunar movements, even eclipses. Some say that actually what man did was vandalize the slab of stone. That's maybe why archaeologists decided to rebury the stone back in 1965. They noticed markings of graffiti and erosion from the climate and agreed that it was best kept safe under the ground. The Cochno stone stretches roughly 43 feet by 26 feet. That's almost the size of a bus. What sets the Cochno stone apart from other slabs of rock is how clear and complex its carvings are. Many scientists call it one of the best examples of this prehistoric art in all of Europe. The patterns that show up there can also be found at various Neolithic sites across Europe and beyond, such as Greece, France, Australia, Spain, Italy, and much more. They all share similar cup and ring markings. To be clearer, this type of prehistoric art is also known as a petroglyph. Petroglyphs are carvings made by prehistoric people right into the surface of rocks. Instead of using paint, they chipped, scratched, or pecked at the stone to create images like animals, symbols, spirals, or scenes from daily life. Yet despite all the attention, no one has cracked the code on the Cochno stone. Instead, this is what happened. For a while, it rested quietly beneath the soil until it was dramatically unearthed back in 2016. I say dramatically because this decision shook the archaeological community. Archaeologists from the University of Glasgow decided to reopen the site to study the rock once again. But this time, instead of exposing it to the elements, they used drones and high-tech 3D scanning to capture every groove and swirl with shocking detail. The team created a digital replica so precise it could be studied without ever touching the real thing ever again. This new approach gave hope that one day the Cochno stone might finally reveal its secrets, or at least help us understand what Neolithic people thought was worth carving into stone and hiding beneath the earth. But this digital resurrection came with a price. The real stone, vulnerable after centuries underground, had to be buried once more, shielded from the various hands and, let's face it, smelly feet of the modern world. Now, the Cochno stone sleeps once again, beneath the Scottish soil. Something needs to be clear here is that although researchers haven't decoded the symbols on this rock yet, they do know one thing. Neolithic rock art was a powerful form of communication and spirituality for ancient communities. These carvings were carefully etched onto rocks, scattered across hills, grazing lands, and near water sources. They likely served practical purposes such as marking important locations or guiding seasonal movements, but their significance went far beyond that. For Neolithic people, these carved stones were deeply spiritual, acting as connections to ancestors, natural forces, and sacred landscapes. The rocks carried meaning as part of a larger relationship between people and their environment. They helped turn the landscape into a living map of both everyday life and spiritual belief. That's probably why we find it all over the world. On the subject of mysterious rocks, we need to talk about these petroglyph-filled rocks that also actually sing. I want you to meet the Kupgal petroglyphs, which are located in Bellary district of Karnataka, India. This Neolithic or Stone Age site was first discovered in the late 1800s, lost, and then rediscovered in the early 21st century. These petroglyphs were carved into the dark surface of dolerite rock. Different from the soft and tender sandstone, the dolerite rock is a hard, dark volcanic rock formed from cooled magma. This fascinating rock art focuses mainly on cattle, specifically the long-horned humped variety we still see in the region today. These aren't just random doodles. Some of the cattle are drawn solo, while others appear in scenes facing off against each other, being ridden by human-like figures or surrounded by people with bows and arrows, maybe representing hunting or capture. Beyond cattle and humans, there are a few other animals like elephants, tigers, deer, and some abstract symbols like dots, ladders, or footprints. But there aren't big narrative scenes. The most interesting thing here is that Kupgal, apart from being visually expressive and super important, also sings. Among its most unique features are the so-called rock gongs. These rock gongs are boulders with natural cup-like depressions that ring out like bells when they're struck with smaller stones, often called a hammer stone. What happens is that instead of emitting a dull thud, the rock sings. It's like Earth's own xylophone. This is a real phenomena that can also be found in other parts of the world. These so-called musical rocks emit resonant metallic tones that can be heard for hundreds of feet. Most rocks, when you hit them, don't produce sound because they absorb energy. But certain types of rocks, usually the harder ones, are more dense and at the same time elastic enough to vibrate when they're struck. In many ancient cultures, sound was used for more than mere entertainment. For many cultures, sound was used as a bridge to the divine. So researchers suggest that these gongs might have been used in spiritual ceremonies and gatherings.
Hey, check this out. Does this pebble look like a face to you? Especially with that red dot in the middle. If yes, you might be staring at the world's first emoji. It was uncovered in Spain and it's 43,000 years old. And that red spot was made by a Neanderthal with a finger. That means this isn't just a dot. It's the oldest fingerprint ever found. But was this really a nose on a grumpy face? And why is that important? Because it hints at something big. A mind seeing shapes, then choosing to add meaning. The palm-sized rock was discovered in a Paleolithic rock shelter tucked away under some light-colored chalky cliffs. It was pretty much a natural overhang where Neanderthals used to hang out. They called it home tens of thousands of years ago. As for the pebble, to me, the dot seems like a random ketchup stain from ages ago. But real archaeologists know better. The neat placement instantly caught their attention. After running tests, they determined that the stain wasn't natural. It seems intentional, not random. Their guess? Someone thousands of years ago may have dipped a fingertip into a mix of ochre pigment and water, then pressed it onto the stone, leaving a tiny prehistoric stamp. To put that theory to the test, they called forensic experts from Spain's national police. At first, the specialists were pretty doubtful. After all, this was the ultimate definition of a cold case. But with multispectral imaging,
which lets scientists study surfaces under different wavelengths of light. Something amazing popped up: clear fingerprint ridges. The print's rounded form showed it came from the tip of a finger. Comparing it with fingerprint databases, the evidence pointed to one likely candidate: an adult male, not a woman or a child. Finding any fingerprint this old is insanely rare. Pigments usually fade, rocks erode, and time wipes away delicate details like ridges. When it comes to fingerprints, the unique patterns actually form before you're even born. During pregnancy, they never change. You might wonder, could a clever criminal damage their skin to erase their fingerprints and fool the cops? Turns out that's basically impossible. Fingerprints aren't just on the surface. They form deep in the skin, in a layer called the dermis. Even if you burn, cut, or scar the outer layer, the patterns underneath usually stay the same and even heal back. Scars might distort the print a little, but that won't help. Ironically, those scars often become a new kind of fingerprint, unique to the person. With today's forensic tools, even a partial print is enough, not to mention the DNA. Yes, fingerprints are just patterns, but they usually come with sweat, skin cells, or oils that may contain DNA. Here's another cool fact: koalas also have unique fingerprints just like we do. Under a microscope, even experts sometimes struggle to tell them apart from human prints. Scientists think these ridges help koalas grip branches and pick leaves with precision. The bottom line: fingerprints are basically nature's unhackable signature. It's something humans, Neanderthals, and apparently even koalas have been leaving behind for tens of thousands of years. If it's been a while since your biology classes, here are some clarifications. Neanderthals weren't our direct ancestors, they're more like our long-lost cousins. Colloquially, we call them humans too. But for scientists, Neanderthals and modern humans were different species within the same genus. Kind of like how lions and tigers are both big cats, but they're not the same species. Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis split from a common ancestor hundreds of thousands of years ago. Neanderthals dominated Ice Age Europe. When Homo sapiens arrived around 45,000 years ago, the two met, mixed, and today, most people outside Africa carry about 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. Eventually, the balance shifted. Within just a few thousand years, Neanderthals disappeared, while modern humans kept spreading. Scientists think it was a mix of different factors. Shifting climates made food scarce, new neighbors brought competition, and their small, scattered populations just made survival even tougher. Now, here's why this little fingerprint is such a big deal. For decades, scientists thought Neanderthals were just built for survival. Strong, but simple. Homo sapiens were supposed to be the creative ones. For a long time, scientists thought they were special because they could think in symbols. Tens of thousands of years ago, our ancestors carved patterns into stones, painted animals on cave walls, and wore beads and pigments as decoration. The earliest proof of symbolic art comes from Blombos Cave in South Africa, where humans etched deliberate designs on pieces of red ochre over 70,000 years ago. Those symbols had no survival purpose. Researchers believe they were expressions of ideas, identity, and meaning. That ability to imagine and represent things we couldn't see was thought to be uniquely human. But this one tiny red dot on a stone challenges that idea. See, the stone already looked like a face, and someone all the way back deliberately pressed a red nose right where it should be. That's symbolic thinking. That could mean that Neanderthals weren't just making tools and hunting mammoths. Perhaps they were able to imagine things. And this isn't just the only clue. This fingerprint is part of a growing pattern that shows Neanderthals were way more like us than we ever believed. For example, in Cova Negra, Spain, archaeologists uncovered the skeleton of a Neanderthal child who had a serious ear condition that made life incredibly hard. However, the little one lived to be around 6 years old. Now, remember, this was the Ice Age. Just managing on your own was challenging. Survival was tough. Food was scarce and danger was everywhere. Yet, someone made sure that the child was looked after, fed, and kept safe. Scientists believe that this shows a trait of compassion, something we once believed only our species was capable of. In Iraq, scientists found a Neanderthal skeleton sprinkled with flower pollen. Sounds random. Maybe not. Some believe it was part of a funeral ritual, like the world's first floral tribute. If that's true, Neanderthals weren't just surviving, they were remembering and honoring life. Neanderthals were apparently quite resourceful. Around 176,000 years ago, they were stacking stalagmites into neat circles in Bruniquel Cave in France. Was this some kind of ritual or just curiosity? Maybe this means that they had the idea of planning and changing their surroundings. Then, around 130,000 years ago, they took eagle talons and turned them into jewelry in Croatia. Yep, early bling. This suggests they were into looking good and possibly showing off a bit socially. There were no sewing machines back then, but Neanderthals had stone scrapers and even bone needles. With those, they crafted animal skin outfits that were perfect for the freezing Ice Age climate. When you step back and consider all of these, that tiny red fingerprint isn't just a mark on stone. If it was meant to represent a nose, it's part of a much bigger story. Neanderthals cared for one another, crafted tools and clothing, created jewelry, painted on cave walls, and built mysterious structures deep in caves. Basically, they were thinking a lot more like us than we used to imagine. And here's the fun part. What if that little red dot wasn't meant to be a nose at all? Maybe it was a joke, a charm, or just a doodle. Heck, it could have been the first face meme scratched onto rock. Whatever it was, unless it really was an accident, it shows imagination. So the next time you send an emoji, remember that Neanderthals had the same idea. Personally, I like that it's a grumpy one, but at the very least, we now have the oldest fingerprint ever discovered. That alone is extraordinary. But add the fact that the print was placed right on a stone that already resembled a face, and suddenly, the questions multiply. Let's hope the researchers discover more about it so we can know for sure. What we do know is that 43,000 years ago, a Neanderthal pressed a finger onto stone and left us with one of the most personal signatures in prehistory.